My name is Jack Turner, and the lake behind my ranch has been part of my life for as long as I can remember. It's a wide stretch of water that covers a little over 600 acres surrounded by rolling hills and old cedar trees. My grandfather bought the land around it nearly 50 years ago, and when he passed away, the property eventually came down to me. Most people in the county know the place as Turner Lake. It's quiet most of the year. Early mornings you might see a fisherman drifting across the water, and in the evenings the lake turns completely still while the sun drops behind the hills. For decades, nothing about it changed. Then about 7 years ago, a developer built a residential community on the eastern side of the lake called Pine Harbor Estates. The houses were expensive lakefront properties with private docks stretching out into the water. The neighborhood also had something that usually brings trouble to places like that: a homeowners association. The president of that HOA was a woman named Karen Whitfield. Karen had a reputation for controlling every little detail of the neighborhood: lawn height, fence colors, mailbox designs. Nothing escaped her attention. At first, she didn't bother me much. My ranch property and the lake itself were not part of the Pine Harbor HOA. The shoreline near their homes stopped right at the property line, but the water itself belonged to my land. That part was written very clearly in the county records. For the first couple of years, the residents enjoyed the lake quietly. They built small docks, kept a few fishing boats tied to them, and occasionally kayaked across the water. Then one summer, Karen came up with a new idea. Apparently, some of the homeowners wanted a lakeside attraction for the neighborhood, something that would increase property values and make the community feel more luxurious. Karen decided what the lake needed was a floating restaurant. The plan was to build a large platform anchored near the middle of the lake with tables, lights, and a small kitchen area where food could be served to residents arriving by boat. At first, I thought the idea was just a rumor. Then one morning, I drove down to the shoreline and saw a construction crew assembling a massive floating structure on the water. It looked like a restaurant deck sitting on several connected pontoons. I walked down the dock and asked one of the workers what they were building. "Floating restaurant for Pine Harbor Estates," he said. I asked who had approved the project. He pointed toward the shore where Karen was standing with a clipboard. That was the first time I realized something had gone very wrong. I walked over to Karen. "What exactly are you building?" I asked. She smiled proudly. "A community floating restaurant," she said. I stared out at the lake. "You know this lake is private property, right?" Karen waved the comment away like it wasn't important. "The shoreline belongs to our residents," she replied. "We're simply placing a structure on the water." That was the moment I realized she didn't understand how property rights worked. Because while the shoreline lots were privately owned by residents, the lake itself was part of my property, which meant any permanent structure floating on it required my permission. Karen clearly hadn't asked for that permission. Construction continued anyway. Within 2 weeks, the floating restaurant was finished. It had wooden railings, hanging lights, and several small tables arranged around the platform. At night, the lights reflected across the lake like something from a resort. Residents loved it. Boats started gathering around it every evening. People brought drinks, music played, and the quiet lake suddenly turned into a busy social spot. For a while, I simply watched. Then I checked something important. The only public boat ramp providing easy access to the lake sat on a narrow strip of land at the western edge of my ranch. Technically, the county used it under a small access agreement my grandfather had signed years earlier, but the land itself still belonged to me. Most of the Pine Harbor residents used that ramp to launch their boats, especially the ones heading out to the floating restaurant. So I contacted the county office and reviewed the access agreement. After a short discussion, they confirmed something interesting. The agreement allowed the county to maintain the ramp for public lake access, but it didn't require me to allow private commercial operations on the lake itself. And a floating restaurant counted as commercial activity. So I made a decision. The following weekend, I parked my ranch truck and a flatbed trailer directly across the entrance to the boat ramp road. Then I installed a temporary gate across the access path leading down to the water. Technically, the public could still reach the lake from smaller access points miles away, but the main ramp used by Pine Harbor residents was suddenly unavailable. Within hours, the neighborhood started noticing boats that normally launched from the ramp couldn't get into the water, and the floating restaurant sitting in the middle of the lake suddenly had almost no visitors. Karen arrived at the ranch the next morning looking furious. "You blocked the boat ramp," she said. I nodded. "You've built a restaurant on my lake." Karen insisted the HOA had the right to enjoy the water since their homes bordered it. I reminded her of something simple. Enjoying a lake and building a business on it were two very different things. The floating restaurant had been installed without permission from the landowner, which meant the entire structure was unauthorized. Within a week, the HOA board requested a meeting. Several members showed up at the ranch along with Karen. Unlike her, the rest of the board seemed far more interested in solving the problem than arguing. They asked what it would take to reopen the boat ramp. I told them the answer was simple. The floating restaurant needed to be removed from the lake. No commercial structures, no permanent platforms, just the quiet water the way it had been for decades. After a long discussion, the board agreed. Within 10 days, a crane barge arrived and slowly towed the floating restaurant back to the shoreline where it was dismantled. Once the platform was gone, I reopened the ramp road and removed the gate. The lake returned to normal. These days, Pine Harbor residents still fish and kayak on the water. Small boats still drift across the surface during summer evenings, but there are no floating restaurants anymore, because the last time the HOA tried to build one on my lake, they learned something very important. If you build a restaurant on someone else's water, you might suddenly find there's no way left to reach it.